Hello. For today, I'm going to be discussing a brief history of embroidery frames. So, welcome to a brief history of embroidery frames. On this first slide, you can see in the picture below, the lady has a slate frame that she is embroidering, and this painting is from 1603. What types of frames are there? There are slate frames, tambour frames, adjustable hoop frames, and scroll frames. Also, there are stretch bars and square hoops, but I won't be discussing that today. I'm mainly going to focus on the slate frames, the scroll frames, the tambour, and the adjustable hoop frames. So, slate frames. This wooden style of frame has 4 perpendicular sides with pegs or notches to help keep the fabric secure. Of the 4 perpendicular sides, there are 2 with mortises and 2 with tenons. A mortise is the hole that another piece of wood slides through. The tenon is a piece of wood being slid through the mortise, which is the hole. So if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, the mortise is the hole, so that would be the 2 bars that are on the top and the bottom. The sides have the holes in them, and then the tenons, those are the 2 that go up and down. So they go through the 2 that are vertical, horizontal. This type of frame can be fixed to trestles. It can have an independent foot, or it can be handheld. A slate frame helps to keep the fabric taut, which means it keeps it very tight, while it is being embroidered, which allows for even stitches and it does not warp the fabric. Here are a few examples of slate frames in history. On the left-hand side is an illumination from the 14th century, and it shows a slate frame being propped up with feet, and that is at the British Library. And on the right-hand side is a painting of the Virgin Mary with the child Jesus. Mary is using a tapestry slate frame, and the frame is fixed and set up on trestles. That painting is from 1440, and it's at the Bibliothèque in France. Here are a few more examples of slate frames. On the left is a slate frame. It has legs, and if you zoom in on the picture, you can also see it has the mortises as well as the plugs on the sides to keep it in the shape that it needs to be in. And that painting is from 1470. On the right-hand side is an etching, and that was etched in 1532 by Alessandro. If I mispronounce this, I'm sorry, please correct me. Paganino? Paganino. We'll go with that. But if you look in that etching, you will see where both women, they have the fabric taut. So you have the fabric, and then it gets sewn pretty much in a little zigzag crossing all 4 bars, and that's what holds the fabric both width and lengthwise, and then the pegs get put in the 4 corners, and that holds the wooden frame where exactly it should be. And if you look closely, you will see one lady has a candle underneath. She's using the candlelight to be able to see the holes, so she knows where to embroider. And then the lady on the right, she is actually using the windows, so she's using the daylight for her light to see where the holes were in the linen to embroider. Here are some more slate frames. On the left-hand side is an example of silk embroidery being done on a slate frame in 1568, and that is from a German book called if I mispronounced this, I'm sorry, the Standardbuch. On the right-hand side is a similar frame construction as we've seen in previous centuries, the same type of frame with the fabric stretched and then stitched onto the wooden frame, and then it's held up by trestles or by legs. And this is also a German engraving, and it is from 1698. Also, the Standardbook, written by two different authors, two different centuries, but still the same type of embroidery frame. And more historical examples of slate frames. On the left-hand side is an engraving. It's by Jan, I will probably mispronounce this, Sweelink. It's from 1627, and it's called Stitcher with Cupid. And with this, if you look, it's a slate frame, but there are no trestles. She's just holding it, and it looks like Cupid is on the other side helping her hold it and helping her with the stitching. On the right-hand side is an example of a very large embroidery frame. Actually, there are two very large embroidery frames, and this is from 1770. If you look closely, you can see the one frame on the right-hand side is so large that there are two women sitting on either side of the frame doing the embroidery. And this is a large example of a slate frame being propped up by trestles. And more slate frames in history. On the left-hand side is a painting from 1720, and if you can see on the frame, again, she's got the fabric, and then it's stitched around on all four sides to hold the fabric in place and keep it nice and tight. On the right-hand side is a portrait of Madame de Pompadour, which was painted about 1763 to 1764. And although if you look, it looks like she might be using a slate frame or a scroll frame, which I'll get into scroll frames in a minute, it's actually been noted that she's doing tambour work on that frame, which leads me to tambour frames. Tambour was a specific type of embroidery. It usually used a circular hoop, and it appears to have emerged in European history about the 18th century, or at least that's when it gained popularity in the European world, and then also into the Americas with the Western world. So for this style of embroidery, the fabric in the frame must be so tight like a tambour drum. If you can hear the pop sound as your hook goes through the fabric, then you know your frame is tight enough. Tambour frames work well with embroidering small items such as a handkerchief. Think of tambour frames as being similar to today's modern adjustable hoop frame. And more about tambour frames. Tambour embroidery originated in India and Persia, and it's known as Ari work or Ari embroidery, named for the R, which is the hold needle tool that is used. Origins of this embroidery can be traced back to the 12th century and became popular during the 16th century in Gujarat during the Mughal rule. Today, Gujarat is still the richest place for embroidered textiles. This embroidery style was later imported to Europe during the 18th century and quickly became popular due to the sensation of it being an exotic embroidery. This style of embroidery is a chain stitch that is worked with a fine hook, known as the R. The hook looks like a crochet hook with a pointy tip. Many of these embroidery frames were made out of metal, bone, or ivory. Tambour embroidery continued to be popular in Western cultures until about 1830, when a French machine was created that could do the same type of embroidery at 140 times faster than by hand. The inventor of this machine was, and if I mispronounce this, I'm sorry, Barthélemy de Monnier. He was a French tailor, and he had obtained a French patent for his machine in 1830, a British patent in 1848, and an American patent in 1850 for his invention, and it ended up being one of the early sewing machine inventions. A little side note about this gentleman, His machine, he had a few of them in his first shop after he got the patent in 1830, and I'm not quite sure on the year, I think it was 1834. There were so many tailors that were afraid of being put out of business because of his machines that they raided raided his shop one night and destroyed all of his machines. A couple years later, he found more financial backing and tried to set up shop again. And again, his machines were great, but so many people that sewed things by hand, like other tailors, were afraid for their own future that they destroyed his machines, and this gentleman ended up dying penniless. But that's just a side note that he helped bring an end to the use of tambour embroidery in Western cultures. With tambour embroidery, it used a hoop frame most of the time, as we saw with Madame Pompadour, that she used a rectangle frame, but mostly they used hoop frames. So now we're on to other hoop frames. On the left-hand side is an example of a hoop frame. Remember before where I said it was made out of metal or bone or ivory? You can see that example in the left-hand side. That needlework stand is from about 1790 to 1800, and it's currently at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And then on the right-hand side is just your typical modern adjustable hoop frame that most people today are accustomed to. So hoop frames. Even though tambour work grew out of fashion, the hoop frame itself was still useful for other embroideries. For example, today, cross-stitch embroidery may be one of the first uses thought of when you think of a hoop frame. But did you know that reversible cross-stitch existed in the 16th century? Check out the picture on the right. First time I saw this picture, it's at the V&A Museum in London. When I first saw it, I thought it was blackwork. Upon closer inspection, I was able to obtain pictures from the V&A Museum, and I was able to zoom in and found out that that's actually reversible cross-stitch. So I got to geek out about that. Anyways, today, most hoop frames are made of wood or plastic. More on hoop frames. On November 17th, 1903, Helen A. Harms patented her invention for the adjustable hoop frame. Prior to her invention, circular hoops, like the tambour hoop, were typically made from metal, bone, and ivory. Those hoops were not adjustable. She came up with the idea for an adjustable hoop, and that's why today they're made out of wood or plastic to help with giving that little extra bit of, I guess, bendability. I don't know if that's a word. And finally, we have scroll frames. On the left-hand side is a picture of a typical scroll frame. A scroll frame, it's similar to a slate frame. The main difference is that scroll frames have two roller bars with wing nuts on the sides. So you have on the sides just two straight pieces of wood with the mortises in them. Those are the holes. And then the roller bars on this example are the ones that are horizontal, and those have the tendons that go through, and then they have the nuts on the end. And then because of that, the roller bar, you can roll up a lot of fabric onto it. So this allows for a large piece of fabric to be embroidered at one time while still maintaining a stable fabric without warping the fabric. A hoop frame would warp the fabric because you're actually pushing the underneath frame into the fabric, and then that can warp some of the threads and then leave the imprint of the hoop frame on the fabric. It appears that scroll frames were born out of the slate frames during the 18th century. In the encyclopedia written by Diderot and I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, d'Alembert from about 1751 to 1772. And in the encyclopedia, it describes an embroidery frame as being, quote, composed of 2 roller bars, AA, and 2 stretcher bars, BB. The slate frame is better for tautness for the embroidery, but the scroll frame allows for a larger piece to be embroidered. So depending on if you have just a single size, say 15 by 15 inches to be embroidered, use the slate frame. If you have something, say 15 by 48, then you'll probably want to use the scroll frame and then just roll your fabric onto the frame. But with that, just know that when you use the scroll frame, you may not have the same tightness, the tautness that you would have on a slate frame. An example of a slate frame today is on the left-hand side. And as you can see, you've got the mortises, you've got the tenons, and then there are the 4 little pegs. On this picture, you can only see the 2 on the top. Those are the little metal pieces, the little metal pegs that go into the holes that hold the bar exactly where you want it to keep the fabric nice and tight on all 4 sides. And then after that, you can stitch anything like bias tape onto the edge of the fabric, and then sew the bias tape and sew that onto the wood. On the right hand side is an example of just your traditional adjustable hoop frame. And like I said, with a hoop frame, you actually have 2 hoops, one on the bottom and one that's a little bit larger on top. And then the one that's on top, you adjust to how tight you can get it. So that way your fabric sits in there, it's nice and tight inside that hoop. The only problem is by putting your fabric into that hoop, the fabric will then get the impression of that hoop. So when you take the hoop off, especially if it's like linen fabric that you're using, it will still show that circular spot where the hoop had been. So, what frame do you prefer to use? Please let me know. Put your comments below. Please like my video. And if you want to see more, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.